Part 2. While most reader-oriented studies in recent literary theory insist on attempting painstaking delineations of an epistemology rather than a rhetoric of reading, a refreshing exception, one that has implications for rhetoric even though its explicit concern is semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs and how they create meaning, can be found in Eco's 1979 The Role of the Reader, a book whose very title indicates a recognition of a strategic element in reading. Eco's concern is with the ways in which writing itself is a reading. For the writer's success depends upon the social intuitions through which he reads his own text, and thereby plays the role of the reader even as he writes. Reversing the habit of theorists who seek to describe how readers create their own texts, Eco explores the many ways in which texts create their own readers. Eco acknowledges that readers can convert their reading into anything they please by regarding the text as an uncommitted stimulus for a personal hallucinatory experience. But such irresponsibility is not the kind of reading he wishes to elucidate. His interest lies instead in the way a text is realized through its reading, which the text itself activates. In other words, as every writer knows, a good piece of writing must anticipate its reading. By the way, an aside here, this directly connects to David Mamet's chapter that we read, A Countercultural Architecture and Dramatic Structure. Eco demonstrates the textual presence of this anticipation, this awareness that the reader must perform certain acts through a close analysis of Alphonse Allais' short story, A Most Parisian Incident, from 1890. The story concerns a jealous couple, Raoul and Marguerite, who both receive messages that the other can be found in a good mood at a masked ball that week. Raoul is told that Marguerite will be disguised as a Congolese dugout, and Marguerite is told that Raoul will be disguised as a Knight Templar. When the dugout and the Templar finally meet at the ball and later unmask themselves, Allais writes, "Both at the same instant cried out in astonishment, neither one recognizing the other. He was not Raoul, she was not Marguerite. They apologized to each other and were not long in making acquaintance on the occasion of an excellent supper. Need I say more?" What has happened here? Suddenly, all the reader has expected collapses. For the characters presumed to be Raoul and Marguerite turn out to be others, characters whom the reader does not know and who do not know each other. As Eco explains, the text has never said that Raoul or Marguerite plan to go to the ball, and it never says outright that the Templar and the dugout at the ball are in fact Raoul and Marguerite. Furthermore, it never claims that Raoul and Marguerite have lovers. Rather, it is the reader who assumes that such things are the case. It is the reader who jumps to conclusions about the adulterous intentions of Raoul and Marguerite. But, as Eco goes on to indicate, this apparently foolish reader has been authorized by the text to make the very assumptions that eventually get the reader into such trouble. The text postulates the presumptuous reader as one of its constitutive elements. If not, why is it said that the two masks cried out in astonishment, neither one recognizing the other? The astonishment, of course, should belong to the reader alone, for the dugout and the Templar have no knowledge of Marguerite and Raoul. Since the text openly inscribes the reader's perplexity One can only conclude that Li generated his story from a set of predictable readerly gestures. What this duping of the reader makes evident is that texts rely on a series of expectations by the reader, which fill out, so to speak, the rather incomplete information provided by the text. Eco maps a number of ways in which this happens through what he calls stylistic over-encoding. For instance, when Eli says that Raoul and Marguerite are married, we take this to mean that they are married to each other. Or to give an example of inferences based on a social store of what Eco calls common frames. When Raoul raises his hand during an argument with Marguerite, we apply the frame violent altercation and assume that he intends to strike her, even though the text does not explicitly say that this is the case. Similarly, we anticipate an adulterous frame when each spouse receives a message about the other's disguise at the ball. Later, our mistake revealed as the masks are withdrawn, it becomes clear that Eli has anticipated his reader's anticipations. All of these instances parallel what Grice calls implicature in ordinary conversation, the dependence of a great deal of our utterances on not what is said, but what is implicated. What then does the story mean? Eco makes an insightful reply. The implicit lesson of drama, an abbreviation of the French title, is, in fact, coherently contradictory. Eli is telling us that not only is but every text is made of two components. Eli is telling us that not only drama, but every text is made of two components: the information provided by the author and that added by the model reader, the latter being determined by the former, with various rates of freedom and necessity. But in order to demonstrate this textual theorem, Eli has led the reader to fill up the text with contradictory information, thus cooperating in setting up a story that cannot stand up. The failure of the apparent story of drama is the success of Eli's theoretical assumption and the triumph of his metatextual demonstration. On one level, the metatextual demonstration illustrates nothing more than what common sense already tells us. The text forms the site of an interaction between writer and reader. But on another level, it specifies this interaction as something not so much located in the text as provoked by the text. Eco's model reader, a term that I find somewhat unfortunate, is effectively the implied reader described by Booth, the reader whom the text gives evidence it expects or desires. Writers, therefore, in their concern for rhetorically positioning their texts in ways that will somehow appeal to readers, must in effect write those readers into being. In other words, playing the role of the reader is an inevitable part of the rhetorical act. But to claim that rhetoric requires an act of reading is not the same as claiming that the act of reading requires rhetoric. In order to assert the latter, we must turn from writers to readers themselves, whose motives may come to seem less receptive than they first appear.